August 7, 1944. The hedgerow country south of Vire, France. SS Untersturmführer Hans Becker traversed his Panther tank's turret slowly, scanning the Norman countryside through his commander's optics. His crew had spent the morning in a game of cat and mouse with American armor, and Becker felt confident. At 1,200 yards, his 75mm L-70 gun could penetrate any Sherman tank ever built. American doctrine taught their crews to close the distance, to get within 600 yards where their shorter 75mm guns might have a chance. Becker had destroyed 4 Shermans in the past week by exploiting exactly this weakness, waiting until desperate American tanks pushed forward into killing range. Through the morning haze, he spotted movement along a tree line. Another Sherman, its hull-down position revealing only the turret. Becker smiled. The American commander was making the classic mistake, holding position at long range where German guns reigned supreme. He ordered his gunner to prepare for engagement, confident this would be another easy kill. The American tank fired first. Becker barely registered the muzzle flash before his Panther shuddered violently. Metal screamed as something punched through the frontal glacis plate, the impact sending a shockwave through the crew compartment. Smoke filled the turret. His radio operator slumped forward. The penetration had come from 1,200 yards, a distance where no 75mm Sherman gun should have been effective. Becker's crew abandoned their burning Panther, but the SS officer couldn't stop replaying the engagement in his mind. The Americans had changed something. The gun that hit him hadn't sounded like a 75mm. It had cracked differently, sharper, more violent. As he watched his tank burn, Becker realized that the comfortable certainty of German range superiority had just been shattered. Somewhere in American factories, engineers had created a weapon that could kill Panthers at distances German doctrine had considered safe. And tank crews across Normandy were about to discover that the rules of armored warfare had fundamentally changed. The Sherman tank that dominated American armored operations through the first half of 1944 carried a 75mm M3 gun, a weapon originally designed for the M3 Lee tank, but proving highly effective in the Sherman's rotating turret. The gun fired a 14.8-pound armor-piercing projectile at a muzzle velocity of 2,030 feet per second, giving it adequate penetrating power against German armor at close ranges. Against the Panzer IV, the Wehrmacht's most common medium tank, the 75mm Sherman could achieve reliable penetrations at ranges up to 800 yards when hitting the frontal armor, and beyond 1,200 yards against side plates. This performance proved sufficient during the North African campaign and the Italian operations, where American tank crews frequently engaged German armor at ranges where their guns remained effective. The tactical reality in Normandy, however, exposed critical limitations in the 75mm Sherman's capabilities. German forces defending France deployed increasing numbers of Panther tanks, whose sloped 80mm frontal armor and powerful 75mm L-70 gun created a vehicle nearly immune to American tank fire at combat ranges exceeding 600 yards. The Panther could penetrate Sherman frontal armor at distances beyond 2,000 yards, giving German crews an overwhelming range advantage that shaped tactical engagements throughout the Bocage country. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Lieutenant Colonel James Hickey commanded 1st Battalion, 37th Armour Regiment, 2nd Armoured Division during the initial weeks of the Normandy campaign. His unit's after-action reports documented the frustration American tank crews experienced when engaging Panthers at typical Norman combat ranges. Sherman crews would identify German tanks at distances exceeding 1,000 yards, ranges where the Panther's gun remained devastatingly effective, but find their own weapons completely inadequate for return fire. The tactical solution required American tanks to close the distance, maneuvering through hedgerow country under fire, until reaching ranges where their 75mm guns might penetrate Panther armor. This approach cost American lives and equipment at rates that shocked commanders accustomed to the tank versus tank engagements of earlier campaigns. Staff Sergeant Paul Morrison, a Sherman tank commander with 3rd Armoured Division, survived 3 separate engagements with Panthers during July 1944. His descriptions of these battles revealed the psychological burden American crews carried when facing German armor with superior range capabilities. Morrison's crew would spot Panthers at distances where German guns could kill them instantly, but where American return fire proved completely ineffective. The knowledge that enemy tanks could destroy them long before they could fight back created a pervasive sense of vulnerability that affected crew morale and tactical decision-making. The penetration statistics told a grim story. German 75mm L-70 guns could penetrate 140mm of vertical armor at 1,000 yards, easily defeating the Sherman's frontal protection of 76mm at 30 degrees from vertical. American 75mm guns, by contrast, could penetrate only 60mm of vertical armor at the same distance, inadequate against the Panther's 80mm frontal glacis, angled at 55 degrees. This disparity meant that typical Norman combat ranges favored German armor so heavily that American numerical superiority became meaningless when Panthers occupied good defensive positions. The Ordnance Department had recognized this problem even before the Normandy invasion. Testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland during late 1943 had demonstrated that the 75mm gun lacked sufficient penetrating power against the newest German tank designs. Reports from the Eastern Front, where Soviet forces were encountering Panthers in increasing numbers, confirmed that tanks armed with 75mm guns required dangerously close ranges to achieve frontal penetrations. American engineers needed a more powerful weapon, one that could engage German heavy armor at the ranges where actual combat occurred. The solution existed in American arsenals, but had been sidelined by production priorities and doctrinal assumptions. The 76mm M1A1 gun, developed as an anti-aircraft weapon, offered significantly better armor penetration than the standard 75mm tank gun. The weapon fired a 15.4-pound armor-piercing projectile at a muzzle velocity of 2,600 feet per second, nearly 600 feet per second faster than the 75mm round. This velocity increase translated directly into improved penetrating power, with the 76mm gun capable of defeating 109mm of vertical armor at 1,000 yards. Captain Thomas Hart, assigned to the Ordnance Department's tank weapons section, had advocated for mounting the 76mm gun in Sherman tanks since early 1943. His analysis showed that the weapon would provide American armor with the penetrating power necessary to engage Panthers at combat ranges where crews could fight effectively rather than dying in desperate close-range rushes. Hart faced resistance from production planners who argued that introducing a new gun would slow Sherman manufacturing at a time when armored divisions needed maximum numbers of tanks, and from some commanders who believed the 75mm weapon's high explosive shell was more important than improved armor penetration. The debate intensified through the winter of 1943, as intelligence reports from Italy confirmed that German forces were deploying Panthers and Tigers in increasing numbers. American tank crews were encountering situations where their weapons proved inadequate against German armor, forcing them to rely on tank destroyers and artillery support for anti-tank operations. This dependency violated the combined arms doctrine that emphasized self-sufficient armored units capable of independent operations. Hart continued pressing his case, supported by testing data that showed 76mm Shermans could engage Panthers on roughly equal terms at typical combat ranges. The breakthrough came when Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, commanding Army Ground Forces, reviewed casualty statistics from Italian tank engagements. The data revealed that American tank losses to German anti-tank fire exceeded projections, particularly in battles where Panthers had been present. McNair authorized a pilot program to mount 76mm guns in Sherman tanks, with production beginning in January 1944. The modified vehicles received the designation M4A 176W, indicating the new weapon and wet ammunition storage system. The 76mm Sherman required significant modifications compared to standard models. The gun's longer barrel and heavier breech mechanism demanded a larger turret with increased interior space for the crew and ammunition. Engineers designed a new turret with a distinctive bustle, extending rearward to accommodate the gun's recoil mechanism and provide stowage for ready ammunition. The modification added approximately 1,200 pounds to the tank's weight, concentrated in the turret, slightly raising the vehicle's centre of gravity and requiring adjustments to the suspension system. Production began slowly, with only 376mm Shermans completed by the end of March 1944. The tanks were distributed to units training for the Normandy invasion, but in numbers too small to equip entire battalions. Most armoured regiments received a handful of 76mm tanks mixed with standard 75mm models, creating a logistical challenge as crews adapted to operating different weapon systems within the same formations. The limited availability meant that many American armoured units landed in Normandy without any 76mm Shermans, still dependent on the 75mm gun that German Panther crews had learned to dominate. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen received one of the first production 76mm Shermans in April 1944, while his unit, Company A, 33rd Armoured Regiment, 3rd Armoured Division, prepared for deployment to England. Chen had commanded a 75mm Sherman through the North African campaign and understood intimately the frustration of engaging German armour with inadequate weapons. The new gun impressed him immediately during training exercises at Fort Knox. The 76mm weapon generated noticeably more recoil than the 75mm gun, and its reports sounded sharper, more violent. But Chen recognized that the increased muzzle blast and recoil represented real penetrating power, the kind of capability American tank crews desperately needed. The 76mm gun fired several ammunition types, each designed for specific tactical situations. The M62 armor-piercing capped ballistic cap round, designated APC-BC, featured a hardened steel penetrator covered by a soft cap that improved ballistic performance and a ballistic cap that reduced air resistance during flight. This round could penetrate 109mm of vertical armor at 1,000 yards and 146mm at 500 yards. High-explosive shells provided effective anti-personnel and anti-fortification capability, though with slightly reduced explosive filler compared to the 75mm weapon due to the smaller bore diameter. The armor-piercing ammunition represented a significant advancement over earlier American tank gun projectiles. The M62 round's hardened steel core could defeat armor plates through kinetic energy alone, without requiring explosive fillers that might detonate prematurely against face-hardened German steel. Testing at Aberdeen had demonstrated that the 76mm APC-BC round could penetrate the Panther's frontal glacis at ranges up to 800 yards when striking perpendicular to the armor surface, and reliably defeat the tank's side armor at distances exceeding 1,200 yards. Chen's crew spent weeks familiarizing themselves with the new weapon system before shipping to England. The 76mm gun required different engagement techniques compared to the 75mm weapon. Its higher muzzle velocity meant flatter trajectory and less need for range estimation at typical combat distances, but also less visible tracer burn that made it harder for commanders to observe shot placement. The gun's increased recoil demanded more careful attention to turret stabilization during firing, and the larger ammunition required modified loading procedures to maintain acceptable rates of fire. The training period revealed both advantages and limitations of the 76mm Sherman. The improved penetrating power was undeniable, giving American crews a weapon that could threaten German heavy armor at ranges where combat actually occurred. But the gun's high-explosive shell, while adequate, carried less explosive filler than the 75mm weapon, reducing its effectiveness against infantry positions and fortifications. This trade-off meant that 76mm tanks excelled in anti-tank operations but proved slightly less versatile than 75mm models in combined arms engagements requiring infantry support. Production accelerated through the spring of 1944 as the Ordnance Department prioritized 76mm Sherman manufacturing. By June, multiple factories were producing the improved tanks, with monthly output reaching several hundred vehicles. But logistical realities meant that most 76mm Shermans built during the first half of 1944 remained in the United States, either in training facilities or awaiting shipment to Europe. The units that landed in Normandy on D-Day carried predominantly 75mm tanks, the improved, armor-piercing guns arriving weeks later as replacement vehicles. The first 76mm Shermans reached Normandy in mid-June 1944, distributed to armoured regiments that had suffered heavy losses during the initial fighting. Company commanders received the new tanks with mixed reactions. Some welcomed the improved anti-tank capability, recognizing that the 76mm gun addressed a critical weakness in American armoured doctrine. Others worried about the logistical complications of operating mixed gun systems within the same units, particularly regarding ammunition supply and crew training. The debate became moot once German Panthers appeared on Norman battlefields and demonstrated their overwhelming superiority over 75mm Shermans. Sergeant Chen's 76mm Sherman landed at Omaha Beach on June 23, part of a replacement shipment that brought 3rd Armored Division back to full strength after initial losses. His crew had trained extensively with the new weapon but lacked combat experience with the gun's actual performance against German armor. That experience would come quickly as American forces pushed inland from the beachhead, encountering German defensive positions anchored by Panther tanks whose crews had grown confident in their range superiority over standard American armor. The tactical situation facing American armored units in Normandy during late June and early July 1944 reflected the collision between German defensive doctrine and American offensive capabilities. Wehrmacht forces had established defensive lines throughout the Bocage country, using the region's dense hedgerows and sunken roads to create interlocking fields of fire that maximized their weapons' range advantages. Panther tanks occupied hull-down positions behind earthen berms, their guns commanding approaches that American armor had to cross to reach German infantry positions. The defensive arrangement forced American tanks to advance across open ground under fire from weapons that could kill them at ranges exceeding 1,500 yards. Standard American tactics involved combined arms attacks where infantry, armor, and artillery worked together to overwhelm German positions. But the Panther's long-range firepower disrupted these coordinated assaults by destroying American tanks before they could close to effective engagement ranges. Sherman crews found themselves caught between the need to support infantry advances and the certainty that moving into Panther killing zones meant probable death. The 76mm gun offered a potential solution to this tactical dilemma by giving American armor the penetrating power to engage Panthers at distances where German guns remained effective, but American crews could fight back rather than simply dying. SS Untersturmführer Hans Becker commanded a Panther Ausf, a tank with 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandart during the Normandy campaign. His crew had destroyed multiple Sherman tanks during the fighting around Köln, and Becker had developed a confident understanding of American armor capabilities. The standard 75mm Sherman posed no threat to his Panther at ranges exceeding 800 yards, while his own 75mm L-70 gun could penetrate Sherman frontal armor at distances beyond 2,000 yards. This range advantage dictated Becker's tactics. He positioned his Panther in locations with good observation and fields of fire exceeding 1,000 yards, waited for American tanks to appear, and destroyed them before they could close to ranges where return fire became dangerous. The morning of August 7th brought humid conditions and reduced visibility across the countryside south of Vire. Becker's Panther occupied a position behind a hedgerow that provided concealment, while allowing observation across open fields where American forces would have to advance. German intelligence had reported increased American tank activity in the sector, suggesting another push toward Vire was imminent. Becker's crew prepared for engagement, loading armor-piercing ammunition and scanning likely approach routes for targets. The first Sherman appeared at approximately 1,100 yards, its hull-down position behind a slight rise revealing only the turret and gun barrel. Becker immediately noted that the American tank looked different from the standard models he had engaged previously. The turret appeared larger, more angular, and the gun seemed longer than the stubby 75mm weapons he had grown accustomed to seeing. His gunner, Untersturmführer Klaus Werner, also noticed the difference and asked whether this might be a new American tank destroyer rather than a standard Sherman. Becker ordered Vire to prepare for engagement while he continued observing the American position through his commander's optics. The range exceeded 1,000 yards, well within his Panther's effective killing distance, but beyond where any 75mm Sherman could threaten his frontal armor. Standard tactical procedure called for engaging immediately, but something about the American tank's appearance made Becker cautious. He decided to wait, allowing the Sherman to reveal its intentions before committing to the attack. The American tank fired first. Becker registered the muzzle flash and instinctively braced for impact, but at 1,100 yards he expected the shell to bounce harmlessly off his Panther's 80mm glacis plate. Instead, the round struck with devastating force, just left of the bow machine gun mount. Metal screamed as the armor-piercing projectile punched completely through the frontal plate, the penetration sending a cone of white-hot steel fragments into the crew compartment. Becker's radio operator, sitting directly behind the penetration point, died instantly. The driver slumped forward, wounded, by spalling fragments. Smoke began filling the fighting compartment as hydraulic fluid from damaged systems ignited. Becker's mind struggled to process what had just occurred. No 75mm Sherman gun could penetrate Panther frontal armor at 1,100 yards. The physics simply didn't allow it. But his tank was burning, his crew was casualties, and the evidence of penetration was undeniable. He ordered immediate evacuation as smoke thickened and flames began spreading from the engine compartment. Vire and the loader abandoned the turret while Becker helped the wounded driver escape through the bow hatch. The crew scrambled away from their Panther as ammunition began cooking off, the explosions confirming that the tank was a total loss. From cover behind a drainage ditch, Becker watched his Panther burn while trying to understand what had happened. The American tank had engaged from a range where German doctrine considered Panthers invulnerable to Sherman fire. The penetration had been clean, the shell punching through armor that should have stopped any American tank gun projectile. Either his intelligence about Sherman capabilities was completely wrong, or the Americans had introduced a new weapon that German commanders didn't know about. Sergeant Chen's 76mm Sherman had achieved exactly what the Ordnance Department's engineers had designed it to do. His gunner, Corporal Mike Sullivan, had identified the Panther at approximately 1,100 yards and immediately recognized it as a priority target. Chen ordered engagement, confident that his 76mm gun possessed the penetrating power to threaten German heavy armor at this range. Sullivan's first shot struck the Panther's glacis plate slightly off-center, the M62 armor-piercing round defeating the German tank's protection through sheer kinetic energy. The crew watched through their optics as smoke began pouring from the Panther, followed moments later by secondary explosions that confirmed a catastrophic kill. Chen's crew had just demonstrated that American armor could engage Panthers on roughly equal terms at typical Normandy combat ranges. The 76mm gun had penetrated frontal armor that German crews believed made them invulnerable to American tank fire. This single engagement represented a fundamental shift in the tactical balance between Sherman and Panther tanks, one that German commanders would struggle to understand as more 76mm Shermans reached the battlefield in the following weeks. The German Military Intelligence Service, the Fremde Heere West, received its first reports of unusually effective American tank fire during the second week of August 1944. Field commanders submitted after-action reports describing Panther tanks destroyed by frontal penetrations at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards, engagements that should have been impossible based on known Sherman gun capabilities. Intelligence analysts initially dismissed these reports as exaggerations or misidentifications, assuming that American tank destroyers, rather than standard Shermans, had achieved the kills. The possibility that American factories had produced an entirely new tank gun and integrated it into existing Sherman hulls never occurred to German planners. SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper, commanding 1st SS Panzer Regiment, encountered the new American tanks during fighting near Mortain in mid-August. His Panthers engaged what appeared to be standard Sherman formations at ranges exceeding 1,200 yards, expecting the easy kills that had characterized earlier engagements. Instead, German tanks began taking penetrating hits from distances where 75mm guns should have been completely ineffective. Piper's after-action report described American shells that struck with noticeably different sound characteristics, sharper cracks that indicated higher velocities than the familiar 75mm impacts. The acoustic difference became one of the few ways German crews could distinguish 76mm Shermans from standard models during combat. The longer gun barrel was difficult to identify at combat ranges, and the modified turret looked similar enough to standard Sherman designs that visual identification proved unreliable. But experienced Panther commanders learned to recognize the distinctive crack of 76mm guns firing, a sound that warned them they faced opponents capable of penetrating their frontal armor at ranges German doctrine had considered safe. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber commanded 2nd Company, 24th Panzer Regiment, during the fighting around Falaise in late August 1944. His unit had lost 3 Panthers to frontal penetrations during a single engagement with American armor, losses that Weber initially attributed to unusually skilled enemy gunnery or lucky shots. Examination of the destroyed tanks revealed penetration holes significantly larger than those created by 75mm projectiles, suggesting a more powerful weapon. Weber reported his findings to division headquarters, but German intelligence remained uncertain about whether the Americans had introduced a new gun or simply improved their ammunition. The confusion reflected fundamental failures in German technical intelligence regarding American industrial capabilities. Wehrmacht analysts had correctly identified that American factories prioritized mass production over sophisticated designs, creating weapons that emphasized reliability and ease of manufacture rather than technical excellence. This assessment led German commanders to assume that American tank armament would remain relatively static, with improvements coming through incremental refinements rather than completely new weapon systems. The possibility that American industry could develop, test, and mass-produce an entirely new tank gun, while simultaneously maintaining high production rates of existing models, exceeded German expectations of industrial flexibility. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen's crew engaged their 2nd Panther on August 14 near Domfront. The German tank occupied a hull-down position approximately 900 yards distant, its turret traversing to engage American infantry positions. Chen identified the target and ordered immediate engagement before the Panther could locate his Sherman. Corporal Sullivan fired 2 rounds in rapid succession, the first striking the Panther's turret ring and the second penetrating the glacis plate near the driver's position. Both hits achieved penetration, the second shot proving catastrophic as it ignited ammunition stored in the hull. The Panther's turret lifted partially off its mounting as internal explosions tore through the vehicle. The engagement demonstrated another advantage of the 76mm gun beyond simple penetrating power. The weapon's flatter trajectory at typical combat ranges reduced the need for precise range estimation, allowing crews to achieve first-round hits more consistently than with the 75mm gun's more curved flight path. Chen's gunner had engaged a partially concealed target at 900 yards and achieved 2 hits within seconds, a rate of accurate fire that reflected both crew skill and the weapon's inherent ballistic advantages. American armored divisions began receiving larger numbers of 76mm Shermans through late August and early September as production accelerated and logistics systems adapted to the new equipment. By September 1st, approximately 30% of Sherman tanks in frontline units carried the improved gun, with the proportion increasing steadily as replacement vehicles arrived from depots. Company commanders learned to employ mixed formations that combined 76mm tanks in anti-armor roles with 75mm models, providing high explosive fire support for infantry operations. The tactical flexibility of operating both gun types within the same formations proved valuable as American forces pursued retreating German armies across France. 76mm Shermans could engage enemy armor at ranges where their penetrating power provided decisive advantages, while 75mm tanks remained highly effective against infantry positions and fortifications, where their larger, high-explosive shells proved more destructive. This division of responsibilities allowed American armor to maintain balanced combined arms capabilities while exploiting the anti-tank advantages of the new gun. Lieutenant Michael Richardson commanded a platoon of 4 Shermans, 2 equipped with 76mm guns and 2 carrying standard 75mm weapons. His tactical approach emphasized using the 76mm tanks as his anti-armor element, positioning them to cover likely German tank approaches, while the 75mm Shermans supported infantry advances. This arrangement proved highly effective during fighting near Metz in September, where Richardson's platoon destroyed 3 Panthers and 2 Panzer IVs without losses, the 76mm guns engaging German armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards, while 75mm tanks suppressed enemy infantry. German tank crews adapted their tactics as they gained experience against 76mm Shermans, but found their options increasingly limited. The traditional German advantage of engaging American armor at long range had been negated by a weapon that could penetrate Panther frontal armor at distances where German guns remained effective. Panther commanders could no longer assume that ranges exceeding 1,000 yards provided safety from American tank fire, forcing them to either close the distance and accept mutual vulnerability, or maintain extreme ranges beyond 1,500 yards, where both German and American guns struggled to achieve reliable penetration. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The close-range option proved tactically unfavorable because it negated the Panther's armor advantages, while exposing German tanks to American numerical superiority and combined arms coordination. At ranges under 800 yards, Sherman crews could employ their faster turret traverse rates and superior crew ergonomics to achieve higher rates of accurate fire than German tanks, whose crews operated in more cramped conditions with slower power traverse systems. The extreme range option reduced engagement effectiveness for both sides, but favored American forces whose greater numbers and artillery support could compensate for reduced accuracy. SS Hauptsturmführer Michael Wittmann, the legendary German tank ace, was killed on August 8 near Sintho when his Tiger tank was destroyed during an engagement with British and Canadian forces. While Wittmann never encountered the 76mm Sherman, his death symbolized the changing tactical reality facing German armor in Normandy. The range superiority and armor protection that had made German tank aces so devastatingly effective during the first half of 1944 was being eroded by Allied weapons that could engage German heavy tanks on increasingly equal terms. The era of German armor dominance through technological superiority was ending, replaced by battles where industrial capacity and numerical advantage would prove decisive. Oberst Hans von Luck commanded 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign and witnessed the impact of improved American tank guns on German tactical planning. His after-action reports described how Panther crews that had operated with confident aggression during early Normandy fighting became increasingly cautious as they encountered American tanks capable of threatening them at long range. The psychological shift from hunters to hunted affected German armor effectiveness beyond simple kill ratios, as Panther commanders became reluctant to accept engagements where American guns could reach them. The industrial implications of American gun development became apparent as production statistics reached German intelligence through captured documents and prisoner interrogations. American factories had produced over 8,000 76mm Shermans by the end of 1944, with monthly output exceeding 1,000 vehicles during the final quarter of the year. This production rate demonstrated an industrial flexibility that German planners found difficult to comprehend. American factories were simultaneously producing multiple Sherman variants with different armament, power plants, and transmission systems, maintaining high overall output while introducing significant technical modifications. German tank production, by contrast, struggled to maintain output of existing designs while introducing even minor improvements. The Panther tank had entered production in late 1942 but continued experiencing mechanical reliability problems throughout 1944 as engineers attempted to refine the design while maintaining production. Schedules. German factories produced approximately 6,000 Panthers during 1944, impressive numbers given Germany's deteriorating industrial situation, but far below the combined Sherman production from American factories that exceeded 40,000 tanks during the same period. Staff Sergeant Chen's combat experiences through September and October 1944 provided a crew-level perspective on how the 76mm gun changed tactical dynamics. His Sherman engaged German armor on 14 separate occasions between August and November, achieving 9 confirmed kills against Panthers and Panzer IVs. Chen's crew survived 3 hits from German anti-tank weapons, the Sherman's wet ammunition storage preventing catastrophic fires each time. The combination of improved offensive capability through the 76mm gun and enhanced survivability through wet stowage created a fighting vehicle that could engage German armor with reasonable confidence of success. The crew coordination required to maximize the 76mm gun's effectiveness evolved through combat experience. Corporal Sullivan, Chen's gunner, learned to identify Panthers by their distinctive profile at long ranges, allowing engagement before German crews could locate the American tank. The loader, Private James Rodriguez, developed loading sequences that maintained rapid fire rates despite the 76mm ammunition's greater size and weight compared to 75mm rounds. Chen himself refined his command techniques to exploit situations where the gun's flat trajectory and high velocity provided engagement advantages. German prisoners of war provided American intelligence with valuable information about how Wehrmacht crews perceived the new American tank guns. Interrogation reports from September 1944 described German tankers who expressed surprise and concern about Sherman tanks that could penetrate Panther armor at ranges they had considered safe. Several prisoners mentioned that their training and tactical doctrine had emphasized exploiting German range superiority, but this advantage had been largely negated by American weapons they had not expected to encounter. The psychological impact of losing their primary tactical advantage affected German crew morale beyond simple fear of being killed. The Battle of Aracourt in late September 1944 provided a concentrated demonstration of how 76mm Shermans could dominate German armor when employed effectively. Combat Command A, 4th Armored Division, equipped primarily with 76mm tanks, engaged elements of 5th Panzer Army in a series of engagements that destroyed over 200 German armored vehicles while suffering minimal losses. American crews exploited their guns' long-range capabilities to engage Panthers and Panzer IVs at distances exceeding 1,200 yards, preventing German forces from closing to ranges where their superior armor might provide protection. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division, attributed his unit's success at Aracourt partly to the 76mm gun's performance against German heavy armor. His after-action report described engagements where American tanks destroyed Panthers with first-round hits at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards, kills that would have been impossible with standard 75mm guns. Abrams noted that his crew's confidence had increased significantly since receiving the improved weapons, affecting their tactical aggressiveness and willingness to accept engagements with German armor. The German perspective on Aracourt revealed confusion and frustration about American tank capabilities. 5th Panzer Army's intelligence summaries described Sherman tanks with unusually effective guns that could penetrate Panther frontal armor at long range, but analysts remained uncertain whether these were standard Shermans with improved weapons or a completely new American tank model. This uncertainty prevented German commanders from developing effective counter-tactics, as they could not reliably identify which American tanks posed the greatest threat until those tanks opened fire. Hauptmann Wilhelm Bartelborth commanded a company of Panthers during Aracourt and survived multiple engagements with American 76mm Shermans. His personal account, written years after the war, described the psychological impact of facing American tanks that negated the Panther's primary advantages. Bartelborth wrote that German crews had grown accustomed to dominating Sherman tanks through superior range and armor, but the new American guns forced Panthers to fight at ranges where both sides could achieve lethal hits. This tactical parity, combined with American numerical superiority, created situations where German armor could not achieve decisive results despite individual technical advantages. The logistical requirements of supporting 76mm Shermans created some complications for American supply systems, but proved manageable given the massive industrial capacity backing Allied operations. The ammunition was not interchangeable with 75mm rounds, requiring separate supply channels and inventory management, but American logistics had adapted to supporting multiple equipment types throughout the war, and the addition of another ammunition variant represented a minor challenge compared to the tactical benefits the weapon provided. Private Rodriguez, Chen's loader, described the physical demands of handling 76mm ammunition during sustained engagements. The armor-piercing rounds weighed approximately 27 pounds each, compared to 22 pounds for 75mm projectiles. This weight difference became significant during extended battles, where loaders needed to maintain rapid fire rates while working in the confined space of a Sherman turret. Rodriguez developed techniques for bracing himself during firing to absorb recoil shock while maintaining access to ammunition racks, skills that improved his loading speed and reduced fatigue during multi-hour engagements. The Sherman tank's mechanical reliability proved as important as its improved firepower during the European campaign's final months. Chen's tank operated continuously from August through November with only routine maintenance, accumulating over 800 miles of combat and administrative movement without mechanical failure. This reliability allowed American armored units to maintain operational tempo during the pursuit across France and into Germany, keeping pressure on retreating. Wehrmacht forces that struggled with fuel shortages and maintenance problems affecting their more complex vehicles. German Panther tanks, despite their superior armor and firepower, suffered chronic mechanical problems that reduced their tactical effectiveness. Final drive failures plagued Panthers throughout their service life, often immobilizing vehicles after only several hundred miles of operation. Transmission problems created additional reliability issues, with some units reporting that only 50 to 60% of their Panthers remained operational at any given time. These mechanical shortcomings meant that German armored formations often deployed with significantly fewer tanks than their paper strength indicated, negating numerical advantages they might otherwise have enjoyed. The contrast between American and German approaches to tank design became starkly apparent through these reliability statistics. American engineers had prioritized mechanical robustness and ease of maintenance over maximum performance, creating vehicles that could sustain high operational tempos with minimal maintenance support. German designers had emphasized technical sophistication and combat performance, producing tanks with impressive specifications, but inadequate reliability for sustained operations. The 76mm Sherman embodied the American philosophy, combining improved combat capability with proven mechanical systems that crews could maintain in field conditions. Captain Thomas Hart, the Ordnance Department officer who had advocated for the 76mm gun since early 1943, visited European combat units in October 1944 to assess the weapon's battlefield performance. His interviews with tank crews confirmed that the gun provided the anti-armor capabilities American forces had desperately needed during the Normandy fighting. Crews reported high confidence in their ability to engage German heavy tanks, a dramatic shift from the vulnerability they had experienced with 75mm weapons. Hart's final report recommended continuing 76mm production as the primary Sherman armament for the remainder of the war. The German failure to develop effective countermeasures against 76mm Shermans reflected the Wehrmacht's deteriorating strategic situation during late 1944. German industry struggled to maintain production of existing tank designs, while Allied bombing campaigns disrupted manufacturing and raw material supplies. The resources required to develop and field new weapons that could restore German armor advantages simply did not exist. German tank crews would face American 76mm guns with the same Panther and Tiger tanks that had dominated earlier fighting, but without the range superiority that had made those vehicles so effective. SS Untersturmführer Hans Becker, who had survived the destruction of his Panther in August, returned to combat duty in October, commanding a new Panther Ausf G. His second engagement with 76mm Shermans occurred near Metz, where his company attempted to counterattack American positions. Becker's training and combat experience taught him to engage at maximum range, but the American tanks returned effective fire at distances exceeding 1,100 yards. His Panther survived the engagement without penetration, but 2 other tanks in his platoon were destroyed by frontal hits that punched through their glacis armor. Becker recognized that the tactical advantage German crews had enjoyed during Normandy had disappeared, replaced by a battlefield where American and German tanks could kill each other at roughly equal ranges. The strategic implications of improved American tank armament extended beyond individual battles to affect the broader course of the war's final months. German forces could no longer rely on armor superiority to offset Allied advantages in numbers, artillery support, and air power. The 76mm Sherman had eliminated one of the few remaining areas where German equipment maintained decisive technical advantages, forcing Wehrmacht commanders to fight defensive battles where material shortages and attrition would determine outcomes rather than tactical skill or weapon performance. By December 1944, as German forces prepared their Ardennes offensive, American armored divisions were equipped predominantly with 76mm Shermans. The Battle of the Bulge would demonstrate how these improved weapons performed against Germany's best remaining armored formations, including new Tiger, 2 heavy tanks, and the latest Panther variants. American tank crews would face these battles with confidence, born from knowing their guns could penetrate enemy armor at combat ranges, a psychological advantage as important as the technical capabilities the 76mm weapon provided. The German offensive through the Ardennes forest on December 16, 1944, caught American forces in a vulnerable position but found them equipped with weapons far more capable than those that had struggled in Normandy 6 months earlier. The Sherman tanks that met Germany's armoured spearheads carried predominantly 76mm guns, weapons that could engage Panthers and Tigers at ranges where German armour superiority was significantly reduced. The tactical balance had shifted decisively since the summer fighting, though German commanders attacking through the Ardennes had not fully recognized how completely American armament improvements had negated their traditional advantages. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen's 76mm Sherman occupied defensive positions near Bastogne when German armor appeared through the winter fog on December 19. His crew had survived 4 months of continuous combat since landing in Normandy, and Chen had developed an experienced eye for identifying German tanks at long range through limited visibility. The Panthers advancing toward his position moved with the confidence of crews expecting easy victories against American armor, their tactics reflecting doctrine developed during the summer, when 75mm Shermans had proven ineffective at ranges exceeding 800 yards. Chen's gunner, Corporal Sullivan, identified the lead Panther at approximately 1,300 yards and requested permission to engage. The range exceeded what Chen would have considered effective 6 months earlier, but experience with the 76mm gun had taught him that such distances were well within the weapon's capability. He ordered engagement, and Sullivan's first round struck the Panther's glacis plate slightly off-center. The armor-piercing projectile penetrated cleanly, sending the German tank rolling to a stop with smoke pouring from hatches. The second Panther in the column also took a frontal hit at 1,200 yards, this round penetrating the turret face and causing catastrophic ammunition explosion. The engagement demonstrated how completely the tactical situation had reversed since Normandy. Where German crews had once engaged American armor with confident certainty of their range superiority, they now faced return fire that could penetrate their protection at distances they had considered safe. The psychological impact of this reversal affected German tactical decision-making throughout the Ardennes offensive, as Panther commanders became increasingly cautious about exposing themselves to American tank fire at any range. SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper's Kampfgruppe encountered concentrated American armor near Stoumont on December 19th, his Tigers and Panthers engaging what intelligence had suggested would be lightly equipped defensive positions. Instead, Peiper's lead elements took immediate losses from American tank fire at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. His after-action report described Sherman tanks that fought with unexpected effectiveness, their guns penetrating Panther frontal armor with disturbing regularity. Piper recognized that American armament had improved significantly since the Normandy fighting, but the strategic momentum of the German offensive forced him to continue attacking despite mounting armor losses. The winter weather that characterized the Bulge fighting affected both American and German armor operations, but German tanks suffered disproportionately from mechanical problems exacerbated by cold conditions. Panther final drives, already prone to failure under normal operations, broke down with increasing frequency in freezing temperatures. Tiger tanks consumed enormous quantities of fuel to maintain mobility through snow and mud, straining German logistics that could barely support the offensive even under favorable conditions. American Shermans, designed with reliability as a primary consideration, maintained higher operational readiness rates despite equally harsh conditions. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams led Combat Command B, 4th Armored Division, during the relief of Bastogne, his 76mm Shermans spearheading the advance through German defensive positions. The engagement at Assenois on December 26 demonstrated how improved American tank armament, combined with aggressive tactics, could overcome German opposition despite enemy advantages in defensive positioning. Abrams' tanks destroyed multiple Panthers and Panzer IVs at ranges where the 76mm guns, flat trajectories and high velocities provided decisive penetrating power. German prisoners captured during the Bulge fighting provided American intelligence with additional insights into how Wehrmacht crews perceived the improved Sherman armament. Interrogation reports described Panther commanders who expressed surprise that American tanks could penetrate their frontal armor at long range, a capability German intelligence had not warned them to expect. Several prisoners mentioned that their training had emphasized American tank inferiority, leaving them unprepared for engagements where Shermans demonstrated effective anti-armor capabilities. The statistical evidence of improved American armor effectiveness accumulated through after-action reports and loss assessments during the Ardennes fighting. American tank losses to German anti-tank fire remained significant, but German armor casualties exceeded historical rates as 76mm Shermans achieved kills at ranges where German crews expected to dominate. The exchange ratios that had favored German armor during Normandy shifted toward parity during the Bulge, reflecting both improved American weapons and declining German crew quality as experienced tankers were replaced by hastily trained recruits. Staff Sergeant Chen survived the Ardennes fighting and continued serving through the final months of the European War. His 76mm Sherman engaged German armor on 3 additional occasions between January and April 1945, achieving 2 confirmed kills against Panthers and 1 against a Panzer IV. The engagements occurred at ranges between 900 and 1400 yards, distances where the gun's penetrating power provided consistent effectiveness. Chen's crew completed the war with 11 confirmed armor kills, a record that placed them among the more successful American tank crews in their battalion. SS Untersturmführer Hans Becker commanded his Panther through the Ardennes offensive and into the final defensive battles in Germany during early 1945. His experiences fighting 76mm Shermans had convinced him that German armor's tactical superiority had effectively ended. The range advantages and armor protection that had made Panthers so effective during Normandy no longer provided decisive benefits against American tanks that could penetrate German armor at combat ranges while employing superior numbers and combined arms coordination. Becker survived the war but recognized that German tank design philosophy had failed to anticipate how rapidly American industry could develop and deploy improved weapons. The United States Army Ordnance Department published its assessment of the 76mm Sherman's combat performance in June 1945, 1 month after Germany's surrender. The report documented that tanks equipped with the improved gun had achieved penetration rates against Panther frontal armor of approximately 40% at ranges between 1,000 and 1,200 yards, compared to less than 10% for 75mm weapons at similar distances. Against Panther side armor, the 76mm gun achieved near-certain penetration at all combat ranges, providing American crews with decisive advantages when tactical situations allowed flanking shots. The human cost of the delay in fielding the 76mm gun became apparent through casualty statistics, comparing tank crew losses during different campaign phases. American tank crewmen suffered significantly higher casualty rates during the Normandy fighting, from June through early August, when most units operated 75mm Shermans against German heavy armor. Loss rates declined measurably as 76mm tanks became more common, though weather conditions and tactical situations made precise comparisons difficult. Ordnance Department analysts estimated that earlier deployment of the improved gun might have reduced American tank crew casualties by 15 to 20% during the Normandy campaign. Captain Thomas Hart, whose advocacy had helped push the 76mm gun through development and production, reflected on the weapon's impact during post-war analysis. His assessment emphasized that the gun had provided American armor with capabilities essential for engaging German heavy tanks on acceptable terms, but acknowledged that earlier deployment would have saved American lives during the Normandy fighting. Hart's reports influenced post-war tank development by demonstrating that armor-piercing capability should receive equal priority with other design considerations, rather than being treated as secondary to high explosive effectiveness or production convenience. The 76mm Sherman continued serving with American forces through the final months of the Pacific War, though Japanese armor posed minimal threat compared to German tanks in Europe. The gun's high explosive shells proved effective against Japanese fortifications, and the few tank versus tank engagements that occurred demonstrated the weapon's overwhelming superiority against Japanese armor. Production continued through August 1945, with approximately 10,000 76mm Shermans completed before manufacturing ceased following Japan's surrender. The contrast between American and German approaches to tank armament development became one of the European war's significant technical lessons. American engineers had identified a critical capability gap, developed an effective solution, and integrated that solution into mass production without disrupting overall manufacturing output. German designers, constrained by resource limitations and strategic desperation, had proven unable to respond effectively to American improvements. The industrial flexibility that allowed American factories to introduce major weapon modifications while maintaining high production rates represented an advantage as decisive as any battlefield innovation. Post-war technical intelligence teams examining captured German equipment and documentation discovered that Wehrmacht analysts had correctly identified the 76mm gun by late 1944, failed to develop effective countermeasures. German proposals for improved Panther armor, or more powerful guns, remained trapped in development and testing, while Allied forces advanced into Germany itself. The inability to respond to changing tactical realities reflected Germany's collapsing industrial capacity and illustrated how sustained strategic pressure could prevent even technically sophisticated adversaries from adapting to new threats. Staff Sergeant Chen returned to the United States in June 1945 and participated in training programs preparing armored units for the planned invasion of Japan. His combat experience with the 76mm Sherman informed instruction, emphasizing aggressive tactics that exploited the gun's long-range penetrating capability. The training proved unnecessary when Japan surrendered in August, but Chen's lessons about combined arms coordination and crew teamwork influenced American armor doctrine development through the early Cold War period. The 76mm gun's legacy extended into post-war American tank development, influencing designers who created the M26 Pershing heavy tank and its successors. The experience of developing improved armament for existing vehicles, rather than designing completely new tanks, demonstrated that incremental upgrades could provide significant capability improvements without the delays associated with introducing entirely new equipment. This lesson shaped American military procurement philosophy through subsequent decades, emphasizing evolutionary development over revolutionary redesigns when tactical situations demanded rapid capability improvements. The memorial ceremony for American tank crews who died during the European campaign took place at Henri Chapelle American Cemetery in Belgium during November 1945. Captain Hart attended the service, reflecting on how many of those deaths might have been prevented had the 76mm gun reached combat units earlier in the war. His thoughts returned to the debates during 1943, when production managers had argued against introducing improved armament, citing manufacturing delays and doctrinal concerns. The rows of white crosses before him represented the human cost of those delays, lives that might have been saved by weapons. American factories were capable of producing, but bureaucratic caution had delayed. SS Untersturmführer Hans Becker survived the war and lived to see historians debate the relative merits of American and German armor designs. His perspective, shaped by commanding Panthers during both their period of tactical dominance and their decline into parity with improved Allied tanks, provided unique insights into how rapidly battlefield advantages could shift when industrial capacity enabled rapid weapon development. Becker recognized that German technical sophistication in tank design had proven insufficient against American industrial flexibility that could identify problems, develop solutions, and deploy those solutions at scale within months. The 76mm Sherman represented a quiet revolution in American armor capabilities, a weapon that fundamentally altered the tactical balance between American and German tanks without the dramatic visibility of completely new vehicle designs. The gun's development and deployment demonstrated that industrial nations could achieve decisive military advantages through incremental improvements to existing equipment, rather than pursuing exotic new technologies requiring extensive development time. This lesson, learned through combat experience where delays cost lives, shaped American military technology development through the Cold War and beyond. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.